I think it'll be interesting as far as the sharing of the photographs, because I haven't shared these photographs really anywhere. I've showed them to a few people in small groups or, individuals in person. And I mean, even the family, the Oberlin family, who's the subject of the project, they have the photographs, but I haven't like seen their experience with them or anything like that. So as far as the sharing, it'll be interesting for me too to see how the sharing works. And this project in particular, I mean, so the story has been shared in the sense that it actually started as an assignment, and I'll get into that a little bit of how it came to be. But as it's developed more as a personal project, it's been, 3.5 years or so I've been working on it. And the entire time I've been sort of dreading the point when it comes to figuring out how the work is shared, because I don't really know what works for this body of work. It's not, these aren't people that I didn't know them at all before I got this assignment. And I wouldn't say that I know them very, very well. But it still feels so personal in the amount of connection and vulnerability that they shared with me, that it almost feels like no existing venues for sharing work really can do it, can hold what the project is to me. So, but I think this is actually probably the closest I'll ever be able to get, is being able to share the work with a group of people like this and talk about it, and take, you're all giving me an hour or however long of your time to share in this space. And I think that's really how the work is going to be able to be shared in a way that feels meaningful to me. And I don't know how that'll continue to, there's not really a whole lot of space for that to be the way that work is shared. But yeah, I mean, as far as what I've learned, man, I don't even know where to start, except that there's a philosophy that is overarching with the Oberlins that, when you just read my bio, where that's kind of how I framed everything about what I do now, is emotional availability. And that's what alternative death practice is it's not trying to hide from the pain or the emotion, but rather embracing it and feeling it fully. And so aside from the countless things I've learned from Kate and Deloy, just on a, kind of more practical or personal level, not about death, but just about homesteading and things like that, I've learned so much from them. But I would say the main thing is just to approach life without fear of pain, and to feel fully no matter what. And I think as a photographer, I'll get into this more later, but I find that the medium of photography doesn't always do a great job of, you have a personal experience that could be incredibly profound and deep to you, and then you have the images as this relic for that experience, and that's what gets shared. And a lot of times I don't think they even come close to being representative of how impactful that experience might have been to you. And so many journalists, there's kind of this mentality within journalism of putting up certain emotional walls when you're creating the work, so that you're not basically driving yourself crazy to make the work. But if you're coming from a place of being emotionally walled up while you're making it, and then you're presenting it to an audience, knowing that they're going to receive something that's significantly more diluted than what you experience, then to me, that doesn't work. To me, I say, if I'm a vessel, fill me all the way up. I want to feel it all the way. And then hopefully, if it's like a percentage thing, then, the audience will will get more if the person creating the work is feeling it more fully.
Mike, so this thing of like getting to a place where you could feel more when you were making images. Do you think photography has contributed to your ability to cultivate more presence and to feel more, or do you think those were sort of tangential tracks for you in your life? Like, I guess another way to say it is, how did you get to a place where you could be such a present and feeling person?
Well, I think it's come in stages, and there's one particular moment that I'll speak about as we're looking at the images, that was a significant moment in that journey.
Hmm.
Um, w- but it's both. Photography is both. It puts you in the situation. It's kind of, for me, all of these really. I've had so many like really really life changing experiences through photography being the catalyst for these experiences that I'm having. And so in that sense, it very much is the reason for those feelings of connection that I have. But on the other hand, it is in some ways a barrier to the
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm.
I think if I just happened to be in those same experiences without a camera, I maybe would feel them even more fully. Um, and that's where sometimes putting down the camera comes in, and just being present, because I think the act of photography takes up so much of your mental space. Just on a technical level, you're thinking composition, you're thinking all these different technical things. And so I think while you're doing that, it can be hard to feel fully embrace a moment and feel it at your core. So I'll speak to the moment that happened for me with this project. And throughout the process, I was trying to kind of cultivate that, but there was a particular moment that I
Hmm.
just kind of decided to go all in there.
I appreciate you saying that the tool can be both, can be something that takes us out of life. It can also be something that takes us in life, right? That we can
Yeah.
stand off at this really safe distance and use our camera to just point at things, versus really getting in there and being touched by the process itself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, the thing that I want to say that I think is the most important thing that I have to say at all tonight is the amount of gratitude I have for the Oberlin family. Um, like I've already said, how much I've learned from them and how profound the experience has been. But um, for them to have well, this will kind of be a good segue into how this all started, which was Deloy, who's the husband of Kate, who's the one that passed away. He actually reached out to this writer, Libby Copeland. Um, she was a freelance writer, and she had written about alternative death practice stuff. And he, before Kate ever got sick, which was in 2012, which is when she was diagnosed, even before that, he was already really tapped into this whole world of alternative death practice. And so he was aware of her writing and aware of other things. But so anyway, he chose to, they chose, Kate and Dule chose to tell their story. It wasn't that, someone came knocking at their door saying, "We heard you were doing this. Can we tell your story?" They wanted to tell their story, and that that just kind of resulted in them contacting this writer, the writer pitching it to Esquire, and Esquire reaching out to me, simply, as far as I know, for proximity reasons. Like, I don't think I was
Mm,
given the assignment because of any reason other than that I was close enough,
mm,
which is kind of crazy to me because it's like so happenstance that I happened to get this assignment that was so actually perfectly aligned with the thinking I was already doing, the work I was already doing, but took it a whole degree deeper. Um, so yeah, that was kind of how it all started. And I went down to meet them for the first time, uh, about, this will be early 2017, around probably January. And immediately I just connected with them, and uh, I knew I wanted to approach this project differently from how I would approach most things. Like, I didn't feel like it was necessary to photograph them very much. Um, I don't think I would want to be photographed while I was dying very much. And the fact is that they were open to that, and I think it was more like me choosing to not do that, just kind of out of respect, and I just didn't want to be any kind of a negative presence. So instead, we would just have these conversations. I would visit and we'd talk for about an hour, and then I would wander the property and just shoot things that were inspired by what was being said, and um, spoke to their philosophy, which is very present all over their property. I mean, there's so many things that really speak to how they live and why they do what they do. Um, and then all these synchronicities started popping up with them. I had actually, they ended up, this is fast forwarding in the timeline, but they ended up donating Kate's body to the Western Carolina University Forensic Studies program. They have what a lot of people would uh, have referred to as a um, body farm there, where the forensic study students can study cause of death and how, decomposition and all these things. But there was another part of that facility that was specifically doing a study for this thing called the Urban Death Project, run by a woman named Katrina Spade in Seattle. She was in Seattle, but the research was being done in North Carolina. And so this other facility was about alternative death practice. It wasn't about forensic studies as much as it was about trying to figure out on a large scale, can you do decomposition, and then have that as have like the soil used in gardens and things like that. So I had actually been to Western Carolina University to photograph before, and it was a story about Katrina Spade, and this program they were doing. So I was already kind of familiar with that. And what I came to find out was that connection between Western Carolina University Forensic Studies program and Katrina Spade was made by Kate and Deloy years before, because like I said, they were already tapped into this whole world, and they had become aware of what Katrina was doing in Seattle. They knew what was going on at Western Carolina, and they made that connection. And so that was already kind of an immediate realization. And then also came to find out that they started talking about, oh, they have two sons that live in Asheville. So I asked who they were, and it turns out I knew their sons too. They live in West Asheville, and a friend of mine, Tim Husson, amazingly talented photographer and filmmaker, had done a whole project about their house, because they are also products of these amazing people, and they're amazing people themselves. They have this urban homestead in West Asheville. So yeah, it all started to really feel connected, and a natural thing for me to keep wanting to do. So those 6 months before she passed, I went down, I don't know how many times, not that many, but maybe 6 times, 5 or 6 times, and I would just have a conversation with Kate and Deloy, and they were very, very vulnerable, open conversations. And that's a big part of what I'm so grateful for, is that there was no taboo subject matter. It was very, I mean, even when it came down to, I didn't know exactly what the next phases of after she was dead were going to look like. But I knew I wanted to document the process as long as I could. And so there kind of came to the point of asking Kate, like, are you okay with me photographing your decomposing body? And I mean, for the most part, she was under mulch, and that wasn't the case, but she was very open to that. And so that was kind of the level of openness that we had. And Deloy as well was really, it was interesting to see their different perspectives leading up to her death. He was staying, I think his coping mechanism was to stay in like pragmatic mode. He was just so looking at all the details of how things were going to happen. How are they going to keep her body cool enough for 4 days? They did have a 3-day funeral, and then brought her to university on the 4th day. So all of that was like this really pragmatic thinking, and she she had all kinds of wonderful things to say. I could read you one quote if you guys want. That was, I think, a big part of the inspiration. I actually only recorded one conversation with her, and I only photographed her twice before she passed away. I don't regret the not photographing her more, but I do regret the not recording more conversations. So this is something that she said, and all of my conversations with her were, she was very sick, and she would usually only have maybe 45 minutes, and then she would just kind of tell me, like, I'm kind of flagging on energy and I can't really do this anymore. So I do wish she said so many amazing and profound things in that state of being so sick and exhausted, and probably on, when she was on chemo and all kinds of things that I'm sure affected her. So I would have loved to have talked to her before that. I'm sure she was even more profound in her speaking then. But here's something she said. Afterlife, or a vision of whatever, doesn't exist to me, but I love the idea of molecular dispersion. As I die, I'm potential to be a tree or some other life form that doesn't exist yet. So there is no end. I don't really see an end. But I also don't see a perpetuation of my ego or sense of unified self, which helps me see the present moment. These are consequences that are happening. Because you're here, we're talking. But if you had broken down, we wouldn't be talking. So the consequences yield whatever, and it's always yielding. I just don't think there's an end to the vibrations of the universe, or whatever you want to call it. I think that's the mystery of it. How did it begin? Will it ever end? Well, you don't put those types of questions on it. So whatever happens after death, I'm ready. Maybe just nothing, or maybe just a big nothing. Maybe some consciousness. Wouldn't that be crazy? But I like the idea that the end of life coming slowly as it has. On the one hand, it's an opportunity to just kind of take things for granted, which I have slipped into. I think it's an amazing human quality that we can do that, get used to so much. But on the other hand, it's given me time to just really appreciate almost the nothingness of everything. It's like it's here, but it's not really here. It might not have it, or it's really here. It may not really be here, or it may not be here tomorrow. It won't be here. Sorry, I'm getting lost here. Maybe it won't be here tomorrow. It's just also ephemeral and so beautifully potential. I love that idea of the beautiful potential of whatever. Dying is a fairly mild part of it.
I love the idea that dying is a mild part of it.
Right.
That's intense, right? That's really intense. Would you be up for sharing some photographs?
Of course, yeah. Let's go full screen. Is that working for everybody? Just double checking. We good? Are we seeing it?
It's all good. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. I don't know how much I guess I'll just kind of walk through that. This isn't an edit, by the way. This project isn't at the point of having an edit. I'm still shooting it, but this is just kind of sort of almost chronological, but I don't think I'll actually present it chronologically because that feels kind of inappropriate to everything Kate just said. So this is their house, and there's so much about their house that speaks to stewardship and having this kind of connection with the land through the physicality of working on a farm or working the land. Obviously, the sickle is a good representation of that, and also death. There's bones everywhere. That's something their family has done for many years, is collect bones of all the animals they've had, which has been horses, cats, dogs, everything. They're all either out in the patio, or some of them are in boxes up in attics, but they have bones everywhere. So this stuff is not all this thinking about death and everything for them. None of it was new. It was all a long time coming. They had done a lot of traveling and experiencing death in other cultures like Nicaragua, Indonesia, Egypt, um, and I think that really shaped their worldview. This is the only actual portrait of just Kate that I ever shot. Um, I think I really, I don't know. I haven't talked to Deloy about this portrait or how he feels about it. I really love that it, out of all the portraits, and and generally in portraiture, I kind of try to like communicate the heaviness of something. If it's a heavy story, I want to communicate that gravity. And this is the only image out of all of them that had a little bit of a smile to it. And I didn't have enough, this was so early on in the project, I didn't have enough understanding of them as people to understand why that was so important. So I'm so glad that that was more accidental than anything on my part. But in retrospect, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have that picture of her kind of smiling, because it's so representative of her philosophy in life and death. Uh, so this is on their property. This is a wild grapevine growing up a red cedar tree with poison ivy all around the base. Um, to me, it kind of speaks to, these are, it gets a little more complicated when you talk about invasive species and stuff, but these are all native species, and one of them is killing the other basically, and but it's part of this natural process. And there's beauty in that. As a homesteader, maybe you cut that vine, maybe you don't, but I think just appreciating the naturalness of the process, and poison ivy also being this kind of plant that people have this negative association with, but it's just a natural part of this ecology. This is their basically their front door, and you just get so much from the hand hewn logs, the pins in the timber framing. Like, as a woodworker and someone who works very hands on, you get so much story from that. To me, I do. These are redbud leaves in the fall. I've always loved redbud and the heart shapes of the leaves. And they were talking about when they did the first scan of Kate to see the cancer, it was like, they said it was like sesame seeds in her, like little bits of tumors all over in her breasts. So this image kind of looks like that to me. This is a K and D, Kate and Deloy, and a heart carved into a beech tree outside of their house. I was recently walking in the woods around my house and found a beech tree. It's so common with beech trees in particular. You see people always carve their names into beech trees, the smooth bark. I think it's just like people don't know that they're beech trees mostly probably, but they just know that that's like smooth bark that you would carve your name into or whatever. And I was walking in the woods around my house the other day, and I found a beech tree with these bear claw marks on it. And it was funny to me that the bears even know to do that. And this one, the version that published in the Esquire story was a slightly different version of this one, and Deloy told me he really didn't like it. I don't have many options. I'm shooting, this is medium format. I shot maybe, I may have shot a whole roll, 10 frames of them for this portrait, but maybe not even that. But this one, again, and I don't know if that's what it was particularly for him, but she's smiling in this one, which she wasn't in the other one. And that might, I don't know, I'll ask him how he feels about this one. And it is important to me. I know any of you who are trained in journalism, we're not supposed to give a shit what the people think about their own photographs, but I've come to strongly disagree with that. I do care more what they are to them than what they are to me or to anyone else. Susan, this reminds me of when you were talking about your process with the shooting in the woods for a year and just waiting for things to glow. that's kind of what I was seeing with this little beech tree. And this is just kind of like, I don't expect anyone else to go there with this image, but what I was thinking about when I was shooting this was I was reading this book. I think it's called The Hidden Life of Trees, and I don't remember the author. It's a great book, but sorry for not remembering the author. And it's talking about like these mycelial, mycorrhizal, I'm not saying that word right, relationships between the fungi and the trees, and how they communicate in these really complex ways. And they particularly were studying beech trees because you need a constant, so you kind of study one species at a time. But I think the more we learn, the more we're realizing that this is basically just how nature works, and it's true of all, probably most plant species. But that these beech trees had this level of familiarity, where they would share nutrients with each other, and specifically they'll share with any other plant around, but they're going to give more to another beech tree, and they're going to give a little bit more to a beech tree that was actually derived from the nut of that particular tree. So they know the relatives somehow. And so I was thinking of this one. This one actually is really close to the other beech tree with Kate and Deloy carved into it. And so it may very well be a direct descendant of that tree. And so I was kind of thinking of it as a familial kind of thing. This casket of sorts was made before I ever visited. It was made by a friend of theirs from a cherry tree that had fallen in a hurricane on their property. And it was made simply to transport her body, because she wasn't buried in any traditional way. It was made just for the purpose of bringing her body to Western Carolina University. But it was just this really beautiful thing that was just there for months. And now they still have, and Deloy still has it, and he intends it for it to be used for his body for the same purpose. He's already donated his body to the same study, Western Carolina. This is Kate holding an urn made from a beautiful walnut burl, of her father's ashes. And this was very much kind of like was born of a conversation and a collaboration. She wanted to kind of wrap in this cloth, and she chose that object to share. This is a little tulip poplar leaf on I believe a horse skull on their property. And Deloy with one of their horses. This is a rug they picked up on their travels, maybe South America or Central America somewhere. They had a house in Nicaragua up until her passing. I think maybe they've sold it now, or he's sold it now. And this is their house. This is actually the first time I ever visited there. And I was just emailing with Deloy today to tell him about this, and I'm hoping to go back and shoot the property some more soon, if everyone feels safe about that. But really, just in so many details in and around their house, you just see these connections between things. I mean, here, the two largest trees in the image are tulip poplars, and the siding on the top part of the house is made from tulip poplar bark, which no doubt was harvested from the property. So, there's just these constant reminders of really life and death. I mean, that's what you see so much of, is these things being used in the homesteading kind of process are these things that were alive and now they're dead and now they're being utilized. He took me down to a little area he'd made to dry bones, and this is his cat that had been drying and decomposing for some time. And another one of their horse. So I was actually on assignment in Virginia, and I was packing up. This is July 8th. I was packing up to leave the assignment, and I got a text from Deloitte saying she had passed. That was July 8th, 2017. And so I knew that, the next several days I was going to be spending with them. But that night, as I drove back, I stopped a few times to make some images. These are the only ones that aren't specific location-wise to the Oberlins, but they were specific to I was feeling and in that time. This is the same night. It was a full moon. And this is before the funeral. It's Kate's body under the blanket on ice. I've been trying to figure out how to photograph plants in a way that doesn't necessarily personify. I don't want to try to capture something about plants that's like humans, because what's beautiful about plants is different from what's beautiful about humans. But this is a weeping willow on the first day of the funeral. And, it was called that for a reason. That tree, it does have a kind of emotive quality, which is personifying, but I do think it's a beautiful tree either way. And this is a 3-day process of the funeral, and so much of it was music and, a certain ebb and flow of emotion. Obviously, a lot of sadness, a lot of crying, and a lot of joy and celebration and storytelling. This oak tree, from the first time I visited, I started photographing it, and it had died and fallen, or they cut it down, but it was already dead. Not too long before I arrived for the first time. So I was able to kind of follow the sequence of events with this tree falling in conjunction with Kate's process of dying. I love looking at end grain with wood. Here you can kind of read, you probably don't have the resolution to see it on your end, but toward the middle of the tree, the rings are really close together, which would indicate a really slow growth. And that's because they're under a canopy of bigger trees in most cases, and as it's in its earlier life. And then one of those bigger trees at some point would have fallen and died, and that gave the opportunity for this tree then to shoot up and have its moment. And I can almost pinpoint the moment that happened looking at the end grain. And so that's that philosophy of death as beautiful potential. Another example of the potential, same tree being, again, utilized for firewood, and some more animal bones in their shed and firewood. Deloy during the funeral. And this is after the funeral, when it was time to bring Kate's body to Western Carolina. Throughout the whole process, there was so many flowers, which I came to realize how important flowers were to her. They actually, you'll see some images of it later, but they lease out part of their property to a flower farmers. So that's where all the flowers came from. This all happened really quickly. This part of the process, I wish I could have hit pause and slowed things down, but it was all so incredibly intentional and beautiful. And it was out of any time I've witnessed death, and I've had people closer to me die, but it's never been as emotional as this. And I think the emotion that I feel around this, actually, it's not that it's necessarily sadness, although it was really very sad, but it's just the beauty. I think, like, when I get emotional thinking about this project, it's because of how beautiful it all was and intentional it all was, and how fearless, like I talked about earlier, just not trying to run away from what was happening. So this is the image that I was going to speak to. So I'll kind of pause here for a minute. So what was kind of happening here is, and I just today remembered the song they were playing because they played it a lot. I don't know if this is in this moment they were playing it, but if that's how I remember it. Uh, it's a song. I think it's maybe Bob Dylan did it. The Byrds did it. I don't know who wrote it, but it's "You Ain't Going Nowhere." And Deloy sang that song a lot during this whole process. And this at this stage, he was kind of off to the side playing music while everyone else was decorating Kate's body. And I just remember him singing and playing the flute, and just getting, he's kind of broke down and started crying, and just crawled his way over and laid his body over hers and wept. And it was that was the moment for me when I I decided I didn't need to be a photographer right then. I shot this photo, but then I just remember setting the camera down and just kind of collapsing to the ground and just sobbing, um, not subtly, not quietly, just openly weeping. And that was kind of the moment I was talking about where things changed a little bit, and that it felt like that was the more important thing to be doing right then, to fully feel the moment. And like this photo, I don't think even really is very good or documents it very well. I only keep it in because it's representative of a important moment in which I was thinking about not photographing, and setting the camera down and just fully embracing that emotion. And I remember afterwards, Libby, the writer, saying like, I'm so glad I saw you crying like that, because I was trying not to cry. I was trying to stay professional, and you kind of gave me permission. And I said to her, and no disrespect to her or any journalist, I was like, why would you not want to feel that? Like, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. So um, I just can't. I don't know how you're supposed to tell that story without fully being there. So anyway, that's why that image is really important to me. Um, this is the flower farm that's on their property. I mean, what better representation of beautiful potential than flowers? They're like the poster child of of beautiful potential. Yeah, so this is back to the funeral, and it was so beautiful seeing her completely covered with the flowers like that. This is her son Corey. They covered her with mulch, and she stayed under the mulch for about a year and a half. So it says, I don't know what they're called. They eat ants that fall into the pit. This is back on their property. I did play a little bit with the sequencing to try to maybe go back and forth a bit. I don't know how that's going to work. I'll see as I start to sequence it out, but this is when they were first arranging her body for the funeral. St. Francis, who, from what I understand, embodies a lot of the relationship to land and nature and animals. That's the same oak tree. As it's going back to the earth, it's decomposing. The fungi, the vines are all kind of swallowing it up. That's an outbuilding on their house. It's the same weeping willow tree exactly a year later, in July of 2018. And it looks really different. I don't know. I mean, the property is less maintained. It was freshly mowed the time before. The tree doesn't look as healthy. Like, I kind of got the sense that there was it was a dark period for Deloy, and I think he just wasn't putting the same effort into kind of maintaining everything for a little while. I don't know the state of things right now. So seasons passed, this is Kate is still in the mulch pile right there. This is winter of maybe 2018, I don't know. That's the facility, it's very small. Back into the left from there is the actual body farm where there's bodies out in the open. I've been there too, it's a pretty intense place. And this is during the excavation of her body. There was so much life, and that's exactly what she was talking about, was potential. There was so much activity. This bug, this grub, you can actually it's translucent, you can see through it and see the soil inside of the bug that is, Kate, really, like she's in there, living on through this bug. This is cool, like some little insect riding on a worm.
No way.
Yeah. And again, this is back to the funeral itself. This is the director of the forensic studies program during one of our visits. She was so great. She let me visit anytime. There are red buds in the fall, I believe. This is a mask that was used before, when she was still getting radiation treatment. This is like used for targeted radiation to try to surgically take out tumors without actually doing an operation. And this is as her body's being excavated, her skull. Beetle on her pelvis. This is one of the students, and I'd like to continue also with the students at Western Carolina, because their relationship to death is so different as well, and so familiar. I think they would have a lot to teach as well. But I do think it's also that's from that place of emotional distance, and that's not where I want to be, but I think it's fascinating that these people just are around death every day and they're comfortable with it. I put socks on her so that the bones would be easier to collect. One of the many things, I think I don't know if Deloitte thought of that or someone else, but they thought of all these details. This is kind of an either or. I'm not sure which image is going to get used, but this is the same woman, the director of the program, as she's excavating the bones. And everything's getting archived and separated out. You see right foot, right hand. And that's her body fully excavated. I kept on really wanting to focus on the insects and the animals involved. I felt like that was, especially in this really sterile environment, I think that really spoke to the life that still existed within what is now an inanimate object, but in some ways is still carrying life. The cleaning process. It's a very smelly process. Rotting brains don't smell good. There's some ant drama going on her nose. This is on her skull. You're speaking about time, Susan. This image, or this moment, struck me as she's checking her watch, and it's just to reflect on time in a moment like this is, I think, really interesting. So each bone was, labeled. They have these tiny little Sharpies and they write on every single bone. even the tiny little toe bones, they have a code number written on it to associate it with the body. And then this is kind of where it comes to an end. Right now, this is where the story ends, where Kate exists in a box at Western Carolina University on a shelf. And she can be taken out to be studied if someone wants to know about a particular bone condition or something that she happens to have. That the information's all archived. And yeah, so that's where Kate is right now. And the plan has been that eventually the family will get the bones back, and I think they're just waiting till they're ready for that emotionally. And I don't know when that'll be, and that'll probably sort of be the conclusion of the project whenever that happens. But yeah, so that's where we're at.
Wow, thank you, Mike. And I was thinking about the woman checking her watch. Anybody that has sat with dying people, there's this strange thing when you step out of that crazy liminal space. It's almost like you can't believe the world is still going on. Like you're in such a profoundly different world, and
Yeah.
it's so alive. And one of the things I love that you mentioned is that we get this idea that if you've practiced at death, that somebody might think then that's going to be a clever way to sort of skirt around the fact that you're still going to have to go through the process of whatever that process is. And speaking of her husband, and that the following year, that it wasn't that he didn't, there's sort of no shortcut around the process, that he's still going to go, he's prepared as much as he could, but he's still going to go through grief. He's still going to have a hard year,
Yeah.
and I didn't know if you was it a decision that you made not to focus on his emotional life post her death? Did that just was that just in its own private place, or?
Yeah, and I've had conversations with him since, and I've photographed some of those images, on the property or since she's died. But yeah, that's been something I've been sensitive to since the beginning. Like I said, like I never wanted to make anything any more difficult. They were already kind of approaching it in such a head-on way that I didn't want to add to that by to kind of continuously bringing things up as time goes by. And Deloy has a new partner now. So that was, and I think from the very beginning, he knew that was something that needed to happen. It's like he didn't want to live the rest of his life alone, which is a really hard thing for him to come to terms with. But he actually asked me if I would take pictures of him that weren't of, the emotional stuff, like happy pictures of him, so that he could like create a social media profile to try to find a partner. Wow. And he said that, that before I knew him, he was actually, a pretty upbeat person. I've never, he was like, you've never seen that side of me. Wow. But I remember the day of the burial, we went to Corey and Brandon, their sons, we went to their house afterwards. And I remember this moment where Deloy was introducing me to a family, it was a friend of his, and they were speaking in Spanish, so I didn't fully understand, but he was introducing me. He was saying, "This is Mike," and I don't remember, since it was Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, I don't remember and I don't even know what exactly he was saying, but the way he introduced me, he didn't introduce me as like, "This is Mike, he's a photographer, he's done this and that." It was like, I think it was something to the effect of, "This is Mike, he's a very sensitive person." And that to me was the most validating moment and the most seen I've ever felt, because So, like, why don't we introduce each other in that way? Like something, not just the surface level stuff about what do you do for a living or something, but like, this is a thing that I see about you. And
Mhm.
so that felt validating for me, and it confirmed for me, I think, this approach I've taken that has been not so focused on their emotion through the process. I think that stuff can be spoken to, that, and the images are reflective of that. But
Mhm.
I never wanted to be so in their face about that, the emotional part of it, or like in their lives, really, even aside from just in conversations and things like that. So uh, moving forward, I'll probably shoot a portrait of Deloy and his new partner if they're open for that. I think that speaks to the cyclical nature of it all too.
Mhm.
Um, but I won't shoot a lot more shooting of Deloy, but I will continue to shoot the property. And if anything else happens with the bones, I'll be there for that. I want to shoot a little bit at Corey and Brandon's place if they'll have me, because I think that's another part of the story.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so I'm still kind of deciding what else to shoot, and like I said in the beginning, how to share this work that feels appropriate.
Mhm.
I think maybe a book sort of starts to, like, maybe that makes sense, but even that, I don't know if it'll really feel like the right fit or not. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, it's wonderful that you're the thoughtful consideration about that, right? Finding spaces. I don't know if these aren't your words, but for me, it would be finding a space that gets it. That
Mhm.
there's a way that when you've been through what I would call a sacred experience, that you want the container to honor or at least hold it as best it can. And I could
Yeah, and I've
imagine.
I've had so many experiences with bodies of work that were not that. Uh,
Mhm.
and so this project kind of came at the heels of a previous body work that I spent years on called Wild Roots. That was, photographing people living in a very primitive way in the woods of Western North Carolina. And for that kind of a project, it kind of reached the audience that is the pinnacle of what that you would hope for with a project like that, which was National
Mhm.
Geographic. But the experience of that was really, it felt so like not the right fit, and it was being kind of exoticized
Mhm.
to an opposite end of my intention with the work, which was normalization, and showing it as this real, like, as an actual viable alternative way of living.
Mhm.
um so that's happened to me a lot, where I've had the thing that looks the most like successful with a body of work. Several of, like, my personal bodies of work have had that thing that everyone would think would be the goal, but in each case it has not yielded the kind of reception or the connection that I hope to create with the work, or at
Mhm.
least I don't think it has. I don't always know what people's reactions are, but so I'm extra uh, protective over this particular body of work, more so than anything
Mhm.
I've ever done before, where I'm not in any hurry, and I'm okay with, like, just sitting on it until something feels right.
Mhm. That's great. Diana was asking, um, the series has a title. I know we used a title for this talk, but have you settled on a title?
I've been calling it "At Home with Death." That'll probably continue to be the title. I don't. If I come up with something else, then I'll do that.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
yeah, that's where it's at right now.
Another piece of the work I wanted to speak to was the mountains and the moon, those
Hmm.
images from driving back.
Hmm.
And it reminds me of this great work that Arnold Mindell does. And he's Jungian psychologist, but one of the things he's most known for is working with people in extreme states of consciousness, including people who are deep in comas.
Hmm.
And he believes that when you enter into that space, when you've stepped into that sacred space, that you can be in, and Liz knows this from having just gone through it. When you're there at the edges of death, you're at this intersection of kind of death and life, or spirit and life. And he considers that a field, and once people have entered into that field together. And in this work that he does, when he's working with a client in a coma, he decides they decide on an imaginative realm where the synchronicities are seen as messages, as part of the communication. So somebody's in a coma, he might ask them a question and he considers the wind and the curtain part of the answer.
Mm.
Or and he communicates at that level of the imagination, at that level of synchronicity, and follows any subtle signal that arises in the field. And that he talks about when people enter into a process with other people who are dying, they make a kind of, they come into this field together, and that all of a sudden you will start to feel these amazing synchronicities where their property and her dying extends out into the mountains or into the moon, that you step into a kind of, not a parallel universe, like I don't want to make it all sci-fi, but you know what I mean, there's a liminal space that starts to exist, that you can occupy and step into.
Yeah,
so,
that image of the moon in particular, what I was really seeing there, was there's like, it has this metamorphosis kind of thing happening where there's like a cool blue kind of halo around the moon, and then just above that there's the gradient into like a warm orb above it, which I don't know if that reads in the image, or if people saw that or not, but that to me was like, felt like was speaking to that.
Darlene was asking, has this shifted your goals as a photographer, or have you permanently changed your process, or
Yeah, well, mostly what it's done is put me into like a several year long, I don't want to say, you know, career crisis, because it doesn't feel like a crisis. It's actually a really positive thing, but it's this questioning of everything, and the space of not really feeling great about any of the ways in which I put work into the world or have in the past. Not that I feel bad about them, but I don't feel, and it's made me question if photography even works for me, for what I'm trying to do. And this project is the closest I've come to it working for me. So that's been the main thing that it's set me down this path of thinking about. And as far as goals, it's helped disillusion those goals like I was talking about that are like career benchmarks, because I think so often that's counterproductive to the actual goals of connection. So like if you're sharing with a really broad audience, I work regularly for some of the biggest publications in the world, and so that's millions of people that are seeing the images, and that's successful. But I think something more like this, where there's 18 or 20 of us or whatever together in this space, like really engaging with the work, that to me is successful. Even just most often the way when I've felt that it really worked, like photography really worked, has been in conjunction with talking about it in conversations, not just me talking to people at people, but conversations around the work, and a pretty slow process. Like it needs to be an hour or more to really talk about a body of work. And you just don't get that very often in any kind of publication. You're just not going to get that. So then it's like, okay, well, how does that that awareness fit into my career as a photographer? I'm wondering who's this Oberlin commenting. And if whoever you are, DC Oberlin, you can unmute yourself for a moment if you're open to saying hi.
I don't know if my microphone works.
Hey,
It
yeah.
does.
Is this Deloy?
This is Steve.
Wow, thank you so much for joining.
this has been wonderful to have you in our life. I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you. As I've said, it's been one of the most profound and life-changing things that I've ever been a part of, and just the beauty and openness that you shared is just there's not words for it, really. The words don't do it, the images don't do it. It's just something that I feel and think about all the time, and so thank you for that.
You know, the thoughts that you've expressed have been moving, and I found that this has been a healing experience watching this evening. I'm here with Margie, and I know Corey and Brandon are likewise very tied to this experience in a more healing way because of the role you play.
Well, that means the world to me. So thank you. And so I don't know, the audio is a little bit rough. I don't know if everyone heard that, but I heard what you said, and like I had said to everyone else, you guys had not seen some of that work, which I told Deloy in an email earlier. I'm more than happy to share it. It's just I didn't know how they were going to feel about, or if they were open to seeing it yet. So I don't know what that process is like for you guys, seeing some of that for the first time.
Well, I can just say that the bones are much less emotional than the flesh.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't find shooting the bones to be particularly emotional, actually. So, yeah.
But the bones are a fitting monument, or a fitting, as fitting as any headstone.
Yeah, I agree. And where are you guys at in that process of, do you still plan to take the bones home at some point?
Well, it makes the most sense to me that the bones are for the future contemplation of those who live on, particularly those of the next generation and those who may learn from it. I'm not ready to bring the skeleton of my wife into a home with a new partner. I think that's an inappropriate distraction.
Yeah.
I don't have grandchildren. My sons are not ready to take possession of the bones. Excuse me. But they're a beautiful thing, and I would like to behold them as all beautiful sculptures of human life that are left in calcium are.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is, no matter where they are, they'll always exist somewhere.
And they'll always be beautiful, and they'll always be Kate.
Yeah.
Someone will look at those bones and look at her history and make a connection.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here on the call. I didn't know whether or not you guys would make it, but thank you.
So I'm just glad I have a wonderful partner to support me through this next phase.
Well, I haven't read all the comments over here. I just saw Oberlin, and that jumped out to me. But
yeah. Does anybody have a question or thought or experience that they want to share along these lines?
as that's come, is, some people can type in or unmute or whatever. But one other thing, an acknowledgement I want to make about the Oberlins, that's beyond the point of, the generosity of the emotional space they've let me into. Deloy also donated a whole bunch of really, really incredible, beautiful lumber to me, which I used in the making of a house, which I took the last year. Well, not that I ended in October of last year, but I've been building a house for the last year, and I really don't know how I would have done it to my satisfaction as far as the material if I wouldn't have gotten that from them. And so it's just another way they've given to me, and that, or the Deloy especially, has given to me, and people get to experience that in the house that I built on a regular basis.
And Mike, I just, when I see these photographs and I hear the story, I feel like there's so much of that experience in that house besides the lumber. I don't know if you want to share a screenshot. It's like the most beautiful space I've ever seen. It's just truly exquisite.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if Deloy's even seen it. I'll bring it up. So this actually, I brought up because I wanted to refresh myself. I brought up this article and read it, and I put it in the chat window.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not 100% thrilled with the visual side of how the images were used and stuff. They're all cropped and everything, but I do think the writing was really, really good. So if you're interested in the story by Libby and getting more context, that would be the place to do it. So yeah, this is the house I just built. A lot of this walnut, I don't know if you know, you gave me walnut, Deloy. Part of that rotting pile was actually, some of it was walnut. So some of this is from Deloy, this walnut, and some of it was from my property. These two lofts, both of these lofts, the one on the right and the one on the left, were both made completely with the wood from Deloy. And the ladder on the left, that was all actually made from one piece. We cut it up, but except for the rungs, but the sides are from one piece of oak from Deloy. And so that's one of the lofts. And the front deck, which actually, I don't know if I have another photo of the front deck, but the front deck was from wood from Deloy that was a bridge on his farm, which I didn't think the wood was going to be usable because it had been a bridge. I don't know how long it had been. I'd love to know that, actually, Deloy, if you want to type it into the chat or say so. It had been a bridge on his farm for many, many years, and so I thought it would be too rotten, but after planing it, a lot of it was usable, and I used it for the front deck. So yeah.
Anyone else have questions or thoughts or comments or stories or anything you want to say or share?
I have a question. So I was wondering, you talked about how Kate and Deloy had initially reached out. I guess maybe they reached out to you directly, or
To the writer.
To the writer, yeah. So I was wondering, was the process of working with them, was it different from other projects, based on the fact that they were kind of the ones who initiated it?
I don't know if I approach it differently for that reason. I do think there's a whole complexity around permission, because a lot of people will give permission to be photographed for a story, but they may not really fully understand what they're signing up for. They may not know, no one could ever know the life that those images are going to have or how they're going to be used. But I think it's a beautiful thing when you, as a person with a story, intentionally reach out to someone to tell that story, because then I feel better about telling that story, because I know that they grasp what the story is and how it's going to be, to some degree, how it's going to be told, because they reached out to the person that they wanted to tell the story. So in some way, there was a certain authorship in the telling of their own story. And I've been hearing some really interesting history about how, amazingly, this is a really interesting fact, but Frederick Douglass was the most photographed person of the 19th century, and he was so deliberate about like how he was positioned in the images, and so he had this idea of his legacy and controlled his image to some degree. And I think that's great. I mean, as journalists, we're not supposed to allow that. We're not supposed to like let someone have that agency to tell their story the way they want to. But I think that needs to change. I think there needs to be a lot more open conversation, honest conversation. And I understand why those journalistic rules are in place. Like maybe if I was photographing the Trump administration, I wouldn't say like, oh, how do you want to be photographed, Mr. Trump? You know, but in most cases, when it's on a more personal, human level, I think I love when it feels more like a collaboration.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was kind of thinking about. Was that it would hopefully feel more collaborative. I'm a photographer, and I think a lot. I think a lot about those things when I'm photographing other people. You know, permission and sort of the ethics behind making photographs. So thank you.
Yeah, and also any journalist on here cringed at the idea of me accepting a gift from the Oberlins. You know, that's very not allowed. But again, I don't feel like my relationship to that family is anywhere near, to me, like what that established idea of a journalistic relationship is. I look up to them very much. Everyone in the Oberlin family, I look up to them and respect them, and only want to do good by them. And that's not, you know, that's not the way journalism's done. So, but that's the way I'm going to do it. I mean, I also understand that I work for journalistic publications regularly. I work for the New York Times, you know, on a weekly basis, and I understand that that's their rules, and it's not up to me to break their rules. So, when I'm working for a journalistic publication, I kind of try to stick to all of the guidelines that are set in place. And if I have a certain problem with a particular way that might manifest, then I can have a conversation with the photo editor. But on personal projects, I'm not interested in those boundaries at all. I want to be a part of what's happening. I want to fully invest myself emotionally. Same with Wild Roots. When I was photographing that community, it was like I was there to learn and learn how to build a house with them, and you know, learn how to make friction fires and identify wild foods, and that's what I was there for. And the photography was kind of secondary. And I come to kind of feel that way, I think, with anything any photographic work that I do. The photography is like an excuse to be there, but then everything that happens is so much more important than the photographs are. Like, yeah, that's kind of part of that existential crisis I was talking about of like, do the photos even matter? I actually, when it comes to Wild Roots, I wish I hadn't photographed Wild Roots. But I would have never went there if I had. And that changed my whole course of my life, going to Wild Roots. Everything about what I do now, I spend most of my time out in the woods, you know, foraging and making teas and stuff like that. And like that, and building that house with wood that I cut and milled myself because I knew what those trees were, you know, that all was because of Wild Roots. But as a photo project, I think it was a failure, and I almost wish the photos didn't exist. And I don't think they've been a positive thing for Wild Roots, as I'm so happy to hear they have been for the Oberlins. So yeah, it's all about checking in with yourself about what you're actually trying to achieve with photography. And sometimes if it's just the excuse to build a relationship, maybe the photography was important in the beginning, but then the relationship is what's important later. And then you don't even need to take pictures anymore. Like,
well, Dorothea Lange was asked this question, and she said, the best thing we create as photographers is the photographer. And if you have succeeded, the camera is no longer necessary. I thought that's a great way. And speaking of the value of things, Darlene commented that she's palliative care. She's in palliative care, and going forward, she's hoping to develop a thanatology curriculum and working to help people have choice about how they die.
Mm-hmm.
And that that this work is a tremendously powerful gesture towards that cultural shift. So sometimes we forget, right, that the work that we're doing adds to a larger cultural conversation that's needing to be had. And so thank you, Darlene, for that reminder. And then Francis had a question. Francis, did you want to ask it in person? Where are you? Or I can read it.
I guess I could talk.
There
I just
you
don't
are.
have my webcam tonight.
Okay, yeah.
So first off, Mike, I'm like crying over here. Those photos are beautiful. And I'm kind of interested in kind of your take on objectivity versus subjectivity within the work, because I know it's something I work in a very personal way as well, and I kind of struggle with the objective versus the subjective within the work. And is that something that you've considered throughout this process, or is it something that you don't feel like applies here?
Well, I find the process to be almost entirely subjective, and I'm embracing that. But what's interesting is I have shared this work in a group critique before, and I take a little bit of an issue with the kind of fine art mentality of that you're always supposed to be the subject, like you're the subject and the thing you're photographing is the object. And for me, so some of the more documentary images that are of these kind of documenting the sequence of events, those could be considered more objective images, whereas the ones of, plants and objects around the house would be more subjective because they're more kind of interpretive. They're my thinking about what I'm seeing in the conversations that I'm having with the Oberlins. So in that way, there's a balance between the two. And in that group crit, the idea was completely take out all of the images that are specific to events that happened and the funeral and all that stuff, and just use the ones that are more interpretive. And that just really clashes with my approach and perspective, which is that it is it's personal in that I'm perceiving the events and the relationships and translating them into images, but it's really coming from someone else, and I'm like the conduit or the translator of those ideas. So the work is about the Oberlins. Even the images that are of a weeping willow or something like that, it's based on my conversations and trying to learn from and translate the philosophies that I'm hearing from them. So in that way, even those images are sort of less about me than they are about them. So I don't know if that totally fits in with the objectivity versus subjectivity. Maybe that's a slight shift in the conversation to who's really the subject or whatever. But I think the only way my work is personal or that I'm the subject is that I'm learning from and taking ideas from someone else. So I definitely consider the someone else that I'm photographing what the work is about.
I'm muted. So I don't know if you see Liz's message there. These images elicit so much from within. I don't at all feel it was random that you were chosen for this project. Death is sacred, as we know, and from personal experience very recently, that liminal space Susan spoke of required someone with your level of integrity and sensitivity. The universe knew that was best for this family, and thus the stars aligned.
Well, thank you. I hope you're right about that. It did feel weirdly synchronistic. I mean, when I got the call for that, I mean, and I didn't even realize at that point how much I was going to feel connected to that story and how much I would get from it. But it's certainly right away, I was just like, of course, this is exactly what I want to be doing. So for whatever reasons that happened, I'm incredibly grateful that I did. And it was, it was 6 months between getting the assignment and Kate passing. So I was really conscientious of any time I was leaving town, we had to have a backup photographer. Esquire had to have a backup photographer in case she passed away while I was gone.
Wow.
So there was a lot of variables that could have resulted in me not having that opportunity.
We're getting close to our end time. Wonder if anybody else was sitting on a question or a comment that they wanted to ask or share before we say goodnight.
I got an answer from Deloitte, 12-year-old bridge. That's pretty cool. I've been wondering that all along since I got
just want to make sure that there aren't any questions sitting here that we accidentally skipped. We did that one. There's all kinds of beautiful comments, and of course I'll send Mike the chat window so he can read through all those. Here's a new message down here. Oh, thank you so much.
That's from Stephen Kenny, who's an amazing artist down in Florida and maybe moving to Asheville soon. So that's exciting.
I think the only comment or thought I want to leave the group with is that, the Life at 6 Feet project, as we're been in this strange time all together, that we have deepened and expanded our capacity for intimacy and closeness, and so much so that we can move into these more these deeper questions. And I'm just so grateful to this community in terms of how everyone shows up and with the level of thoughtfulness and care that we find, and the images that people submit and the requests that people make in terms of the topics that they want to talk about and share about. And so I just want to thank y'all all so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure to share space with you, and you chose the topic to be here for, and that says a lot about you as well. So yeah, and Mike, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This has been
amazing.
This has been a great opportunity to go back through the work, because I haven't shot for this project in a while, and haven't really gone through it or been editing it recently either. So just having the opportunity to go back through it, and I told Susan, just actually in the preparing of the materials for this, I had 2 good cries just kind of just by myself looking through the images and rereading the article. And so that probably enabled me to be able to get through tonight. Not that I was shying away from emotion by any means, but I think I cried it out earlier, so I was able to actually continue presenting the work without breaking down too much.
For anyone who's here that has not signed up for our newsletter on the website, you can go to 6feet.photography and sign up for the newsletter there, and then you will be sent our This Week at 6 Feet, which tells you all the talks and galleries and exhibitions, and we'll also hear about all of our call for entries. And if you haven't checked out the website, please do. There's beautiful curated galleries and featured photographers and the recordings of past forums and webinars. So we appreciate you going there and taking advantage of all the good stuff that's there.